Keturah opened her mouth to argue, but Malachi's sharp gaze silenced her. She needed to learn when to hold her tongue. She pressed her lips together, her eyes flashing with a spark of rebellion, but she followed him into the hall. He led her to Jedediah's room first. He pushed the door open, keeping the lights off to avoid waking the boy. The bed was empty. The sheets were cold. "Where is he?" Keturah whispered. Her voice was thin with worry as she stepped toward the rumpled blankets. Malachi didn't answer. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. He turned on his heel and strode down the corridor, his boots silent on the heavy carpet. He heard the light patter of Keturah's steps right behind him. "Malachi?" she pressed. He kept moving. He reached the last door on the left and pushed it open. A sliver of light from the hallway spilled across the massive king-size bed inside. There, curled into a tiny ball on top of the comforter, was Jedediah. The boy was half covered by his own small blanket, looking lost in the vastness of the furniture. Malachi took a slow, steadying breath. He hated the guilt that wilted his insides. It was easier to be angry at Hadassah than to face the wreckage she'd left behind. Keturah stepped closer, her face full of questions. The silence of the room felt heavy with everything she wasn't saying. When she reached out toward the boy, Malachi's hand shot out. He clamped his fingers around her upper arm. He gripped her harder than he intended, and he saw her wince. He let go immediately, his jaw tight. He walked past her to the bed and looked down at his son. Jedediah's face was stained with the salt of dried tears. He was only 2 years old. At that age, tears were still allowed. Soon, they wouldn't be. Malachi bent down and gathered the boy into his arms. He moved with a practiced gentleness, cradling Jedediah against his chest. The boy didn't wake, merely leaning his small head against Malachi's collarbone. Keturah followed him back to the nursery in total silence. Malachi tucked the boy into his own bed, smoothing a hand over his hair. When he straightened up, he found Keturah watching him from the doorway. She stepped back to let him close the door. "Does he always go to your room at night?" she asked softly. "It's not mine," Malachi snapped, the words out before he could check them. "It's Hadassah's. I sleep in the master bedroom." Confusion clouded Keturah's blue eyes. "You didn't share a room with your wife?" Malachi gritted his teeth against a surge of old, tired bitterness. "No." He turned toward Zilphia's room, but Keturah was on his heels. She couldn't let it go. "Because you didn't want to?" she asked. Malachi spun around, his eyes flashing. "Because Hadassah didn't want to share a bed with me." "Now, stop the questions." The harshness in his voice was meant for a soldier, not a young woman, but he didn't apologize. He saw the hurt flicker across her face before he turned away. He shoved open the door to the nursery. Inside, the darkness felt lighter. Zilphia was fast asleep in her crib, her breathing steady. Malachi reached down and stroked her chubby cheek with his thumb. For a second, the weight on his chest lifted. He kissed her forehead and turned to leave. "What about the baby monitor?" Keturah asked. Malachi stopped in his tracks. For the last year, the maids or the nanny had always handled the nights. This was the first time they were truly alone with the children. "How did you know?" Malachi asked, picking up the device from the sideboard. Keturah shrugged. "I read about them. I thought we might need it tonight." Malachi looked at the plastic device in his hand. "Hadassah or the help always kept it." He handed it to her. "Take it. It picks up every sound," she noted, her voice steady. "But unless she's crying, you don't need to get up." Malachi nodded. "Let's go to bed. I have an early start, and she'll probably wake us before dawn." He led her to the master suite. He wondered how long it would take before she retreated to a guest room, just like the woman before her. He flipped the lights on and watched her take in the room. Her suitcases were already waiting by the walk-in closet. "I told the staff you'd want to unpack yourself," Malachi said. "Yes, thank you," she murmured. She walked to the window, looking out into the dark gardens. She looked so small against the backdrop of the massive room. Malachi felt a sudden, sharp urge to walk over and put his hands on her shoulders. He forced the feeling down. He wouldn't push himself on her tonight. "I'll get ready," he said, heading for the bathroom. He was wound-tight. Every nerve felt like a live wire. He brushed his teeth and changed into pajama bottoms, trying to ignore the image of his son sleeping in a dead woman's bed. When he walked back into the bedroom, Keturah had changed. She was wearing a silk nightgown covered in tiny sunflowers. She was looking at a photograph on the wall, a shot of a white beach from his summer house. "Didn't I tell you to get rid of those sunflower clothes?" Malachi asked. Keturah jumped, whirling around. Her hair fell in soft curls over her bare shoulders. "Excuse me? I sent you new clothes," Malachi said, his voice rising. "I expect you to wear them." Keturah lifted her chin, her eyes sparking. "I'll look like a lady in public, Malachi. But in private, I wear what I love. I won't become someone else just because you don't like who I am. You chose this. You can't control everything." Malachi stalked toward her. He saw the goosebumps break out on her skin as he moved into her space. "Is that so? I control an entire city, and you think I can't control you?" He stepped closer, pinning her against the wall. "Stop trying to scare me," she said, attempting to move past him. Malachi slammed his hand against the wall next to her head, caging her. "You will obey me." She didn't shrink away. Instead, she stepped closer until their chests were almost touching. "And what will you do if I don't?" The scent of strawberries hit him like a physical blow. He reached out, his arm wrapping around her waist to jerk her flush against him. He leaned down and captured her lips in a hard, demanding kiss. She gasped, her body stiffening in his hold. He pulled back abruptly, his breath coming in short bursts. He turned away and paced a few steps across the room. "You don't have to be scared," he said, his voice suddenly weary. "I won't force you. Last night was a duty. I won't touch you again until you want me to." He saw the look on her face, overwhelmed, lost. She didn't say anything. Malachi sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her. He knew the scars were visible. Long, thin lines ran vertically down his skin. He felt her approach. "You can touch them," he said quietly. He felt her cool fingertips trace the marks on his shoulder blades. A shiver ran down his spine that had nothing to do with pain. "Who did this?" she whispered. "Your father?" Malachi shook his head. "The Bratha. They captured me when I was your age. This was just the beginning of their methods." "My God," she breathed. She sat down beside him. "I thought maybe it was your father. That's how some men make their sons strong. And what about you?" Malachi asked, his eyes falling on the small scars on her knee and thigh. "Did Ephraim do that to you?" "No," Keturah said quickly, reaching out to touch his hand. "He adores me. He would never hit me." Malachi let out a dry chuckle. "I can see why. So where did they come from?" "I love to climb trees," she said with a small smile. "I fell into a thorn bush once. Broke a few bones, too. My dad cut down every tree in the garden after that. He gave me you," Malachi said, looking at her. "What a strange way to show his disdain for me." They sat in silence for a moment, their arms brushing. The air between them felt thick, charged with a heat that hadn't been there a moment ago. Keturah's eyes moved to the tattoo on his chest, the oath of the Famiglia. She reached out, her fingers tracing the ink over his heart. Malachi froze. Her touch sent a jolt of electricity through his nerves. He watched her, his chest heaving as the tension reached a breaking point. "I have an early morning," he managed to say, his voice thick. "We should sleep." "Yeah," she whispered. She moved to crawl across the bed to her side. As she moved on all fours, Malachi's restraint finally snapped. He reached out, his hand catching her hip. He pulled her back toward him, his mouth finding hers in a desperate, searing kiss. His hand moved to the back of her head, holding her steady as the kiss deepened. He felt her pulse thumping against him, her body warming to his touch. Suddenly, a shrill, piercing cry shattered the moment. They both jerked apart, gasping for air. Malachi looked at the baby monitor on the nightstand. "Zilphia," he said. Keturah pushed herself off the bed, her face flushed and her eyes wide. "I'll go to her." "She's probably just hungry," Malachi said, though his voice lacked conviction. Keturah looked at him like a deer in the headlights. The taste of their interrupted moment still lingered, a sharp contrast to the shrill cries echoing through the mansion. Malachi sighed and stood up, adjusting his clothes to hide the physical evidence of how much he still craved her. Despite his internal vow to keep his distance, he had pulled her onto his lap the second they were alone. She hadn't fought him. He couldn't decide if that was because she wanted him or because she was simply too afraid to say no. "Come on," Malachi muttered, gesturing for her to follow. "I'll show you the routine." Keturah grabbed her robe, wrapping it tight around her frame as she trailed behind him. As they reached the stairs, she froze, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Shouldn't we go to her first?" she asked. "Instead of going straight to the kitchen?" Malachi paused, realizing his mistake. He was used to the maids handling the immediate comfort while he prepared the logistics. He nodded slowly, and they pivoted toward Zilphia's nursery. Inside, the air was thick with the sound of a child in distress. Zilphia's face was a deep shade of red, her tiny body trembling with every sob. To Malachi, the cries sounded like accusations. Ever since Hadassah's death, the nursery felt less like a bedroom and more like a courtroom where he was always the defendant. He walked to the crib and lifted the infant, cradling her against his chest. She quieted for a heartbeat before starting up again. He looked back at the door. Keturah was hovering there, looking uncertain. "You don't know anything about kids, do you?" Malachi asked. She hesitated, her voice small. "Only what I've read in books." Malachi suppressed a groan. Her parents had sold her as an experienced caretaker. It had been a lie to close the deal. He led the way down to the kitchen, the weight of the girl and the baby heavy on his mind. He just hoped his son, Jedediah, wouldn't wake up too. He didn't have enough comfort in him for 2 children tonight. In the kitchen, Malachi gestured toward the counter where the formula and bottles sat. "You need to learn to prepare the bottle." Keturah's eyes widened. "I've never done it before." "Then you'll have to hold her while I show you," Malachi said, extending the crying infant toward her. Keturah stepped back, her face pale. "I've never held a baby in my life, Malachi." For a second, the urge to snap at her flared in his chest. He shoved it down. It wasn't her fault she was a pawn in a game she didn't understand. "It's not hard. Just hold out your arms." "What if I drop her?" Keturah whispered. "You won't drop her," he promised, his voice softening slightly. "Just take her." Keturah finally reached out. She took Zilphia, pulling the baby tight against her chest with a look of pure terror. She's heavier than she looks." The moment was short-lived. Zilphia, sensing a stranger, began to thrash. Her cries turned into a full-blown scream, her tiny limbs kicking against Keturah's stomach. Keturah looked at Malachi, her eyes pleading for a rescue. "Try to calm her," Malachi said, turning back to the formula. "She has to get used to you." If she doesn't, we're in for a very long year. Shush, Keturah tried, rocking her hips awkwardly. Malachi watched her from the corner of his eye. She was tense, and the baby was feeding off that anxiety. He worked faster, his patience fraying. He wanted to call her father and demand an explanation for the lies, but he knew it wouldn't matter. He wasn't giving her up. She might not be the mother his children needed, but she was the woman he wanted in his bed. The second Malachi took Zilphia back, the screaming stopped. The baby settled into his arms and took the bottle, her sobbing subsiding into rhythmic gulps. "I'm sorry," Keturah whispered, looking at the floor. Malachi didn't answer. He led the way back upstairs in silence. He sat in the rocking chair, though it groaning under his weight. "Go to sleep," he said, not looking at her. "I don't need you for this." Keturah flinched as if he'd struck her. She turned and walked out, closing the door with a soft click. Underscore 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 underscore. The morning sun offered no relief. Malachi had managed 2 hours of sleep. When his alarm went off at 6, he sat up to find Keturah already awake. Her eyes were puffy. "Good morning," she said, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. "I didn't hear you come in." "It was late," he replied shortly. "Is the nanny coming today?" "Dorcas will be here," Malachi said, standing up to head for the shower. "She'll show you the ropes. Your bodyguards are arriving at 7. I want you ready so I can introduce you before I leave for the office." Keturah sat up straighter. Are they her old guards?" The mention of his late wife hit like a physical blow. "No," he snapped, closing the bathroom door behind him. By the time he was dressed in his suit, he went to check on Jedediah. The boy wasn't in his own bed. Malachi found him in Hadassah's room, sitting on the edge of the mattress, staring blankly at a tablet. "Jedediah, you know you aren't supposed to be in here," Malachi said. The boy didn't move. He just hunched his shoulders. Malachi picked him up, ignoring the way the boy squirmed. His patience, already thin, finally snapped. "Enough," he barked. Jedediah froze. From the doorway, Keturah watched, her expression unreadable. Zilphia began to cry from the other room, and the dog started barking downstairs. The house felt like it was collapsing under the weight of its own grief. Malachi walked over and set Jedediah down in front of Keturah. "Get him dressed. Keep him off that tablet. I'll deal with the baby." He didn't wait for her to respond. He needed a moment of silence, even if he had to find it in the middle of a nursery. Keturah stood there, looking down at the small, silent boy. "Hello, Jedediah. I'm Keturah." Jedediah didn't look up. His hair was a mess of knots, and his clothes looked a size too small. Keturah knelt down, trying to meet his eyes. "How about we get you ready for the day? Will you show me your room?" Silence. The boy turned his tablet back on, focused on a game with bright balloons. "Please, Jedediah. I'm new here and I'm lost. I need your help." The boy didn't take her hand, but he stood up and walked toward his room. Keturah followed. The room was cold, filled with neutral tones and expensive furniture, saved only by a few stuffed dinosaurs. She found a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, then knelt back down. "Can you dress yourself?" Jedediah ignored her. Keturah reached for the tablet, hoping to get his attention. The boy let out a sharp, jagged cry and lunged at her. He caught her off balance. Keturah hit the floor hard, and Jedediah scrambled over her, his small fingernails catching her across the cheek. "Enough!" The roar came from the doorway. Malachi was there in an instant, hoisting Jedediah off her. Keturah scrambled to her feet, touching her face. Her fingers came away red. "God damn it!" Malachi breathed, his voice shaking. He looked from his son to his wife. He set Jedediah on the changing table and looked at the clothes Keturah had picked out. "He's still in diapers?" she asked, surprised. "He stopped for a while," Malachi said, his jaw tight. "Then his mother died." He went backward. He changed the boy with practiced, mechanical movements. Jedediah stayed perfectly still, staring at the wall. "He's so thin," Keturah noted. "See if you can get him to eat today," Malachi said. He turned to her, his eyes lingering on the scratch on her face. "This was a mistake." Keturah felt a chill. "You think I'm the mistake?" "I think this whole arrangement is a mess," Malachi countered. He looked at her outfit, a short skirt and bright sweater. "And you can't wear that to meet the guards." "It's just a skirt, Malachi." "It's too short," he growled. "I'm not having you around other men looking like that when I'm not here. You're being unreasonable." Keturah tried to walk past him, but his hand shot out, catching her by the waist and pulling her back against him. "You will change," he commanded into her ear. "Now!" Keturah felt the heat of him, a mix of fear and something else she didn't want to name. "Understood," she whispered. "Let me go." He released her, and she went to the bedroom to find something more appropriate. When she returned in loose slacks and a high-neck blouse, Malachi nodded with approval. "My men are in the office," he said, leading her down the hall. The office was a shrine to power. 2 men stood as they entered. One was older, gray-haired, and looked like a retired soldier. "This is Silas," Malachi said. "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Yoder," the man said. Then Malachi pointed to the second man. He was young, handsome, and had a smile that reached his eyes. "And this is Enoch." Enoch grinned, his gaze respectful but lingering. "Nice to meet you." Keturah looked at Malachi. He was watching her, his eyes dark and calculating. She realized then that this wasn't just about protection. It was a test. "Is there a problem, Keturah?" Malachi asked softly. "I'll have breakfast with the children first," Keturah said, offering a small smile to the 2 men standing in the marble lobby. "After that, we can head out for some shopping." Silas, the older of the 2 bodyguards, gave a stiff nod. He had the surly, professional look down to his science. "There is a guard house on the grounds where we can wait. We'd like to join you for breakfast instead," Enoch interrupted. He leaned against the wall, his gaze open and far too friendly for a man on the clock. Silas shot him a sharp frown, but Enoch didn't look away from Keturah. Keturah felt a flush of embarrassment. She was supposed to be the mistress of this massive, cold house, yet she felt like a guest who had lost her map. "All right. Why don't you go ahead to the kitchen? Do you know where it is?" Enoch grinned. Silas just shook his head. "Okay." Keturah laughed nervously. "I'll find Dorcas and meet you there." She bypassed the formal dining room. It was too large, too echoing for a family meal. The kitchen felt more like a home. It had white cabinets and a heavy wooden table that looked like it had seen years of real use. Zilphia, the youngest, was already there, zipping around in a baby walker. She eyed Keturah with the suspicion only a toddler could manage while turning the colorful wheels on her toy tray. Dorcas was at the stove, the smell of sausage and eggs filling the air. "I'll get Jedediah down," Keturah promised. "Has Barnaby been out yet?" "The master doesn't want the dog in the garden," Dorcas said, her eyes widening. "He only put her there last night as a punishment. She isn't supposed to go out there." "Well, that's going to change now," Keturah said firmly. She headed upstairs to find the boy. Jedediah wasn't in his bed, but a soft shuffling sound came from underneath it. Keturah knelt on the floor, ignoring the pinch of her designer trousers. "Jedediah? I'm taking Barnaby to the garden. Do you want to see her run?" A few moments passed before a blonde head poked out. Jedediah scrambled up, clutching a tablet to his chest like a shield. He didn't take her hand, but he followed her down to the small, cramped room where the dog was kept. The floor was a mess, and Keturah's heart ached. She scooped the small dog up, ignoring the dirt on her white silk blouse. Out on the terrace, the November air bit at her cheeks. Keturah set the dog down. For a second, Barnaby just sniffed the wind. Then, she exploded into a run. She bolted across the grass, twisting and turning in sheer delight. Jedediah watched from the doorway, his mouth hanging open in wonder. "She's happy, see?" Keturah squatted beside him. Jedediah nodded, his eyes locked on the dog. They stayed there for 10 minutes, until the chill became too much. Keturah stood up, tucked 2 fingers into her mouth, and let out a sharp, piercing whistle. Jedediah's head snapped toward her. "Want to learn how to do that?" she asked. The boy gave a slow, shy nod. Back in the kitchen, the atmosphere was tense. Dorcas tried to grab Jedediah to force him into a high chair, and the boy began to scream, flailing his arms. Silas moved to help restrain him, but Keturah stepped between them. "No," Keturah said. "He's a big boy. He gets a big boy chair." The room went silent. Keturah set Jedediah on a regular chair and asked Silas for a pillow to boost him up. She took the tablet and set it aside. "No games at the table, Jedediah. That's what big boys do. If you eat a bite, you can give Barnaby a scrap. Deal?" The boy looked at the dog, then at the sausage on his plate. He took a bite, chewed solemnly, and dropped a piece of meat. Under the table, Barnaby's tail thumped against the floor. "The master won't like this," Dorcas whispered, but she didn't stop them. The shopping trip later that afternoon was a whirlwind of chaos. Keturah found herself wedged in the back of a Cadillac between 2 car seats. It took 6 hours, 10 crying fits, and more diapers than she cared to count, but she returned with bags full of clothes. She bought dresses with sunflower buttons for Zilphia and shirts with "Big Brother" slogans for Jedediah. By the time they returned, the kids were fast asleep. Keturah spent the evening cleaning Barnaby. She put the dog in the tub, then sat on the floor with a pair of trimming scissors, carefully cutting away the matted, itchy fur. By the time she was done, the dog looked half its size and twice as cute. It was nearly midnight when the front door finally clicked open. Malachi walked in, looking exhausted and sharp in his dark suit. Barnaby barked and ran toward him. "You took it to a groomer?" Malachi asked, sounding bored. "I did it myself," Keturah said, leaning against the living room doorframe. She was in a silken nightgown, her feet bare on the cold floor. "I was waiting for you." Malachi hung up his coat, his movements heavy. "Did something happen?" "No. I just wanted to be here when you got home. Isn't that what wives do?" Malachi stepped closer. The scent of winter and expensive tobacco clung to him. He looked down at her, his eyes dark. "You don't need to stay up. I work long hours. I'm not a child, Malachi. And I'm not a nanny." She followed him upstairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. When they reached the bedroom, she didn't let him retreat. "We need to talk. We are married, but I barely see you. I want this to work." Malachi turned, his jaw tight. "This is a marriage of convenience, Keturah." "Convenient for who?" she shot back. "You have a live-in sitter for your kids and someone for your bed, but you won't even have dinner with us. If I'm not what you wanted, send me back to my parents." Malachi's hand shot out, gripping her hip and pulling her flush against him. The heat from his body felt like a brand through her thin gown. "Over my dead body," he growled. He kissed her then, a hard, desperate thing that tasted of possessiveness. When he pulled away, he was breathing hard, his eyes searching hers for fear. "I told you I wouldn't touch you until you wanted me to." Keturah felt the flush creeping up her neck, but she didn't look away. The silence stretched between them, thick with a tension that had been building since the day they met. "What if I want you to?" she whispered. Malachi froze. His pulse throbbed in his temple. He searched her face, looking for a lie, for hesitation, for anything that would give him a reason to walk away. "You want me?" Keturah reached out, her fingers trembling as she touched the silk of his tie. She nodded slowly. "I want you." "Fuck." Malachi looked at her as if he'd lost a long, exhausting battle with his own willpower. He prowled toward her, the movement smooth and predatory, before cupping the back of her head. He backed her toward the large window, the cool glass a sharp contrast to the heat radiating between them. "You want me?" he asked. The intensity in his voice was thick, raw with a hunger he tried to bury for weeks. Keturah's mouth went dry. She looked up at him with wide, honest eyes. "Yes." He didn't wait. He bent down and captured her lips. His mouth demanded a total surrender, a claim he was finally ready to make. He wanted control, and Keturah gave it to him freely. She let the kiss consume her until he finally dragged his mouth away, both of them panting for air. "Like this?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. Keturah looked dazed. She couldn't even process the question. A dominant smile pulled at the corners of Malachi's mouth. He liked seeing her this way, undone by him. "Do you want me like this?" he repeated, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Or somewhere else?" "Somewhere else," she whispered, the words barely an exhale against his skin. He didn't let her reply with anything more. He kissed her again, his protective walls finally crumbling. Malachi scooped her into his arms, feeling the slight weight of her against his chest, and carried her to the bed. He laid her down with a gentleness that betrayed his internal urgency. He followed her down, his heavy, muscled frame pressing her into the mattress. As he worked the hem of her nightgown over her head, his hungry gaze slid over her. He saw the way she watched him back, her eyes tracing the line of his shoulders, and the way his breath hitched. "You're so beautiful," he groaned. He hovered over her, his scent, a mix of expensive cologne and warm skin, filling her senses. He moved lower, his lips finding the sensitive skin of her neck and then her shoulder. When he shifted his focus, Keturah gasped, her hand flying up to clutch at his hair. "Yes!" The word slipped out of her like a prayer. Malachi looked up, holding her gaze, his eyes burning with triumph. "I should have done this last night." He lowered himself between her legs, and she opened for him without a second of hesitation. He cupped her with his large hands, never taking his eyes off hers. The sight of her reacting to his touch was a drug. He watched her breath hitch and her skin flush, enjoying the power he held over her senses. He moved with a slow, deliberate fervor until she was panting, her fingers clawing at his shoulders. She made a small, impatient sound in the back of her throat. Malachi knew that sound. He knew the exact moment her need outweighed her shyness. "Now I crave something sweet," he murmured. He pushed up on his palms, looking down at her. He brushed his fingers over his own skin, catching the moisture she'd left behind, and brought them to his lips. "Perfect. Just as sweet as I remember." Keturah could only watch him, mesmerized by the sight of this powerful man looking at her, as if she were a revelation. He moved lower again, his face hovering over her. He noticed the slight flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "What if I don't get there?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a hint of old insecurity. Malachi slid his palms under her thighs, cupping her and pulling her closer to the edge of the bed. He looked her dead in the eye. "Don't think about it. Just relax and let me take you there. Don't rush. Just let it happen." He leaned in, and the moment his lips touched her, Keturah arched her back. A loud, sharp moan escaped her. She immediately snapped her mouth shut, her eyes darting toward the door. "The kids," she breathed. "The walls are thick, Keturah," Malachi rasped, his stubble grazing her inner thigh. "Our room is at the end of the hall. Don't worry about them. Focus on me." He didn't give her a choice. He was focused on her with a singular, devouring intensity. "Do you enjoy this?" he asked, pausing for a second to see her reaction. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with wonder. "And you? Do you enjoy it?" Malachi smiled darkly. He wedged his shoulders against her thighs, lifting her higher so he could see everything. "I enjoy it very much. Your taste. Your moans. The sight of you." He lowered his head again, his eyes burning into hers. He watched her face as the sensations built. He saw her eyes grow wide and her belly hollow as the pleasure started to radiate through her. She was getting closer, teetering on the edge of a cliff, her hands digging into the blankets. "Please," she bit out, her voice straining. Malachi reached up, his fingers finding her, adding a new rhythm to the heat he was already building. He never took his eyes off her. He wanted to see the exact moment she broke. Suddenly, the tension snapped. Keturah cried out, her fingers scraping over his head as she ground herself against him. She half sobbed, her body shaking from the force of the release. "That's it," he growled, his voice thick with pride. "Just like that." He raised his head, looking disheveled, his dark hair a mess. He didn't stop, his fingers continuing the rhythm, unraveling a deeper need she hadn't even known existed. Keturah moved her hips in rhythm with him, her inner walls spasming. Just as she reached for a second peek, Malachi withdrew. Keturah sucked in a sharp breath, her eyes snapping open. I want more." Malachi's smile was dangerous. He pushed up to his elbows and shed the rest of his clothing in one fluid motion. "You'll get it, but you'll get it with me inside you." He knelt between her legs, bracing himself on one muscled arm. He took himself in hand and ran the tip of his length along her. Keturah gasped at the firm pressure. She was mesmerized. She actually propped herself up on her elbows to get a better view of him entering her. Malachi's gaze cut to her, surprised by her boldness. Then, a raw groan ripped from his throat. "You want to watch?" She nodded, her throat too tight for words. He grabbed a pillow and shoved it under her hips, tilting her up to give her a better view. "Watch then," he commanded, his voice dropping an octave. "Watch exactly how I take what's mine. Let her come to you, Jedediah," Keturah whispered, her voice a soft anchor in the quiet kitchen. "She's shy. Eventually she'll come. Just give her time." Jedediah didn't look up. He remained on his knees, eyes fixed on Barnaby the dog, who was currently a shivering ball of fur tucked under the kitchen table. The boy's face was still puffy from the morning's tears, a result of Keturah hiding his tablet. He looked small, fragile, and far too silent. Dorcas was at the stove, the scent of vanilla and warming dough filling the air as she flipped waffles. She didn't look happy, but she didn't argue when Keturah asked for bacon. "For the dog?" Dorcas asked, her brow furrowed. "Jedediah won't eat if he doesn't trust me," Keturah replied, keeping her voice low. "This is the only way he'll have breakfast. One bite for him, one tiny piece for Barnaby." The older woman sighed, but pulled the package of bacon from the fridge. She moved with a stiff efficiency that spoke of years of keeping her head down. Enoch entered a moment later, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. He didn't just walk, he performed. He sat down next to Keturah, his arm brushing hers with a clumsy intent that felt entirely staged. His smile was a bit too wide, his eye contact a bit too lingering. "I thought we could all go for a walk," Keturah suggested, pointedly ignoring Enoch's leaning weight. "Barnaby needs to see something new." Jedediah's head snapped up. A genuine spark of interest lit his eyes, and he gave a sharp, quick nod. "That sounds like a great idea," Enoch added, his voice smooth. "The weather is perfect. I know a park nearby." "Great," Keturah said, standing up. "Why don't you go prep the buggy? I need a word with Dorcas." As the men cleared out, Keturah moved to the sink, cornering the housekeeper. "You were here from the start, weren't you? When Malachi married Hadassah?" Dorcas's hands faltered in the soapy water. "I was. How was she?" "Really?" Dorcas wouldn't meet her eyes. She focused intensely on a plate. "I only worked for her, Signora. I didn't know her. She kept her distance. She never ate in here. She wanted me done and gone as quickly as possible." She finally looked up, her expression tight. "If you want to know more, ask the master. But I don't think you should." Underscore 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 underscore. The park was a sea of green, but the tension followed them like a shadow. Silas trailed 20 paces behind, playing the part of the watchful sentry, while Enoch stayed glued to Keturah's side. To any passerby, they looked like a young family. "Must be strange," Enoch remarked, sitting beside her on a bench while Barnaby sprinted through the grass. "Living in a foreign city with a man you hardly know." Keturah watched Jedediah. For once, the boy wasn't looking for a scream. He was watching the dogs play with a look of pure wonder. "I've been prepared for this life since I was a girl, Enoch. The rules don't change just because the city does. Rules can be breaking points," Enoch said, his voice dropping an octave. He flashed a look that was meant to be smoldering. "Sometimes, breaking them is the only way to feel free." Keturah turned her head slowly, her gaze cool. "Do you make a habit of breaking rules, Enoch?" He started to answer, but a yelp from the dog park interrupted him. A larger dog was harassing Barnaby. Enoch didn't hesitate. He sprang into action, jogging toward the fence. A young man with a hipster beard and glasses met him there, and together they separated the animals. Keturah watched closely. As Enoch talked to the stranger, his entire demeanor changed. The smoldering look vanished, replaced by a natural, easy charm. He laughed, his body language relaxed and genuinely flirtatious. When he realized Keturah was watching, the mask slammed back into place. He hurried back, carrying a trembling Barnaby. In that moment, the puzzle pieces clicked. Malachi hadn't just hired a handsome guard. He'd hired a specific kind of safety. The walk ended early when Zilphia began a screaming fit that no amount of rocking could soothe. By the time they returned to the house and the baby finally drifted off, Keturah was trembling with exhaustion. She slumped into the sofa, her clothes damp with sweat. She'd given the tablet back to Jedediah just to buy a moment of silence. Enoch appeared, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you need this," he said, sitting down, again far too close. Keturah took the cup. The coffee was black and bitter, but she needed the jolt. She looked at Enoch, really looked at him, and saw the gun holster over his white shirt. He was a trap. A walking, talking loyalty test designed by her husband. "I've been asking myself a question," Keturah murmured. Enoch kept his charming smile fixed. "And what's that?" Does Malachi know? The smile faltered. Know what? That you like men. The silence that followed was heavy. Enoch's expression slipped, a flicker of genuine fear crossing his eyes before he could bury it. I don't know what you're talking about. I saw you at the park, Keturah said softly. You aren't pretending then. I don't care who you love, Enoch. But Malachi knows, doesn't he? He chose you because he thinks you're the only man who wouldn't actually touch me. Enoch's face went pale. If rumors like that spread, the family would kill me. You know that. I have no intention of telling anyone, she promised. But I won't be lied to. Did Malachi ask you to come on to me? To see if I'd bite? Enoch ran a hand through his hair, his composure completely shattered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Go to the staff room, Enoch, Keturah said, her voice weary. I'm done with the games for today. Underscore 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 underscore. Malachi didn't return until after 8. Keturah was waiting in the living room, a heavy crystal glass of Lafroig scotch in her hand. She'd sent him a selfie of her drinking it, a deliberate middle finger to his no hard liquor rule. When the front door slammed, she didn't move. She draped her legs over the arm of the chair, making sure her over-the-knee socks were visible. Malachi appeared in the doorway, a dark silhouette of tailored wool and cold fury. He didn't say a word as he closed the door behind him. He prowled toward her, his presence filling the room until the air felt thin. Was that photo meant to provoke me? He growled, standing over her. I wanted to keep you updated, Keturah replied, taking a slow, burning sip of the scotch. Since you're so invested in every move I make. How were Enoch's reports today? Did he tell you I failed your little test? Malachi's hand shot out, his palm resting on the sliver of bare skin above her stocking. The heat of him was an instant jolt to her system. He took the glass from her hand and drained it in one swallow. I told you no hard liquor, he said, his voice a low vibration. And I told you I don't like being spied on. You used Enoch as a trap. I do what is necessary, Malachi said. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers, his fingers sliding higher under the hem of her dress. No, Keturah said, pushing against his chest. Stop. We aren't doing this. Not while you're treating me like a prisoner. Malachi stiffened, his expression turning to stone. He stepped back, straightening his jacket as if he hadn't just been seconds away from losing control. You're being childish. Am I? You don't trust me. You don't trust anyone. You're waiting for me to turn into Hadassah. The name hung in the air like a curse. Malachi's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. If you don't let yourself know me, you'll never trust me, Keturah said, her voice trembling. And if there's no trust, there's no marriage. I'm moving into the room next to the nursery. You can have this bed to yourself. She turned to walk away, but Malachi moved like lightning. He caught her on the stairs, his hand firm on her elbow. I won't let you move out, he said. You stay. Why? You don't even want to hold me. Malachi sighed, a sound of genuine defeat. He cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. Stay because I want you close. Because I like the way you smell. Keturah's brow furrowed. I smell like sweat and baby formula. You smell like a strawberry field, he muttered, pressing his face into the crook of her neck. I don't even like strawberries. They're fake. Sour. But you? He kissed her then, not a hard, angry kiss, but something slower. Something that felt dangerously like a beginning. underscore 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 underscore. Later, lying in the dark of their shared bed, the barriers finally began to crack. "You were right," Malachi admitted, his voice rough. "I asked Enoch to test you." Keturah, sitting across his lap, looked down at him. "Why?" "I don't trust anyone," he repeated. "The kids, they've never seen a happy family, Keturah. Hadassah and I, we were a disaster." "Then let's be different," she whispered. "Spend time with us. Come home for dinner. Teach me who you are when you aren't the master dot." Malachi looked at her for a long time. "What do you want me to do?" "Trust me. And tell me one thing you actually enjoy. A hobby. Something that isn't killing people." Malachi let out a short, dry laugh. "I used to play pool." Keturah's eyes lit up. "Show me. Now! It's nearly 11, Keturah." "Show me," she insisted. They went down to the cigar lounge in their pajamas. The room smelled of old mahogany and faded smoke. Malachi guided her hands on the cue, his chest pressed against her back as they lined up the shots. For a moment, the weight of the Mafia and the ghosts of the past vanished. Then, the baby monitor flared to life. Zilphia was crying. They hurried upstairs. Malachi waited in the doorway, expecting the usual chaos. He watched as Keturah lifted the sobbing infant. "Shh!" Keturah cooed, kissing the baby's chubby cheeks. "You're okay. You're the cutest thing in the world." Zilphia didn't scream. She didn't fight. She reached out, tiny fingers grabbing a lock of Keturah's hair, and then, for the first time in months, she giggled. The sound hit Malachi like a physical blow. His heart hammered against his ribs. He turned away quickly, his voice tight. "I'll go fix the bottle." He made it to the kitchen before Keturah caught up to him, still holding the smiling baby. She watched him work the formula, her eyes soft and searching. "Malachi?" she asked softly. He didn't look up from the bottle. "Don't ask me about the past tonight, Keturah. Just stay in this room. I'm not going anywhere," she promised. Malachi handed her the bottle, his fingers lingering against hers. "Then teach me how to be a father who doesn't have to hide the tablets. Why don't you eat in the dining room?" Malachi's voice cut through the quiet hum of the kitchen. Keturah looked up from her plate, surprised to see him standing in the doorway. He had actually kept his word. After the intensity of the previous night, she had half expected him to find an excuse to stay at the office, yet here he was, still in his sharp charcoal suit. Dorcas scrambled to her feet, clearly flustered by the boss's sudden appearance. Beside her, Enoch stood and gave a respectful nod. Without a word, the guard picked up his plate and slipped out the back door toward the guardhouse. Since Malachi had cleared the air about Enoch's babysitting duties that morning, things had been less tense, though a lingering awkwardness remained. Malachi didn't wait for an answer. He walked straight to Zilphia's high chair. The toddler let out a delighted shriek, her face a messy canvas of smashed peas. He didn't flinch at the mess, leaning down to press a kiss to her forehead. He barely dodged her sticky, reaching hands before they could ruin his silk tie. Then he turned to Jedediah. The boy sat rigid, clutching a fork with a single carrot slice. Keturah saw the flicker in the child's eyes, a desperate, quiet longing, but he didn't move. Malachi kissed the top of the boy's head before moving to Keturah. He squeezed her shoulder, his touch firm and grounding, but he didn't lean in for a kiss. He took the seat across from her instead. Keturah felt a sharp pang of disappointment, though she understood. With Jedediah watching them like a hawk, Malachi was likely trying to be respectful of the boy's grief. "I prefer the dining room," Malachi repeated, his eyes locking onto hers. "I didn't know you'd be home in time," Keturah said, trying to bridge the distance between them. "I told you I would be. It will stay that way. If I'm running late, I'll call." Dorcas placed a steaming plate of roasted pork and maple Brussels sprouts in front of him. With a quick nod of thanks from Malachi, the housekeeper retreated, leaving the family alone. "We can move to the dining room tomorrow," Keturah promised. The clatter of a fork hitting the floor broke the moment. Jedediah had tossed a piece of meat to the floor for the dog. Malachi's jaw tightened, his brows furrowing in a silent reprimand. Before he could speak, Keturah caught his eye and shook her head slightly. "Your turn now, Jedediah," she said softly. "One bite for you." Jedediah obeyed, chewing his food with a somber, dutiful expression. "What is this?" Malachi asked, his voice low but controlled. "We have a deal," Keturah explained. "He can feed Barnaby scraps as long as he eats his dinner too." Malachi let out a long, slow breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. Zilphia began to whine, reaching for him again. To Keturah's hidden delight, the powerful man stood up, wiped the toddler's messy face with a towel, and settled her right onto his lap. It was a striking image. A man who commanded empires, sitting in a three-piece suit with a little girl in a sunflower dress pulling at his buttons. Keturah reached over and gently stroked Jedediah's hair. He looked up at her, his eyes so full of unspoken sadness that it made her heart ache. If only he would say something. Anything. "How was your day?" she asked Malachi, hoping to break the heavy silence. "The usual," he replied shortly. He wasn't going to talk shop in front of the kids, and she couldn't blame him. His world wasn't one for bedtime stories. "We went back to the dog park," Keturah offered, filling the gap. "And Enoch helped me get my painting room ready. I'm looking forward to starting again." Malachi watched her, his gaze lingering on her face. Keturah found herself reaching up to straighten her bangs, wondering if he still found them childish. "I was thinking we should spend the weekend at the beach house," Malachi said suddenly. Jedediah's head snapped up. The word beach seemed to act like a spark. "What do you think, Jedediah?" Malachi asked, trying to catch his son's eye. "We can build sandcastles like we used to." Jedediah gave a small, hesitant shrug. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. In this house, that was a victory. Underscore 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 underscore. The transition to the coast happened in a blur. By Friday afternoon, they were pulling up to a stunning white bungalow nestled against the dunes. The Atlantic Ocean churned in the distance under a heavy, bruised sky. As Keturah stepped out of the car, a sharp November gust tore the black cowboy hat right off her head. Before it could tumble into the tall grass, Malachi's hand shot out, snatching it from the air with effortless grace. "Nice catch," Keturah laughed, taking the hat back. "Reflexes are a survival skill," Malachi said, though he eyed her outfit with a mix of confusion and amusement. She was wearing her favorite pink sweater, an oversized coat. "Why did I say that? It's a tragedy of a hat." Keturah's smile faded slightly as she looked at him. "How many times have you actually had to use those reflexes? To survive, I mean?" Malachi went quiet, his eyes drifting toward the gray horizon. He didn't answer right away, and that was an answer in itself. "Never mind," Keturah said, reaching for the car door. "Just promise me you'll be careful." Inside, The house was a sanctuary of white linen and glass. Huge windows looked out over the swaying marram grass. It was cold and moody outside, but the house felt bright. "I'll get the bags," Malachi said, after helping Zilphia into her travel crib. Keturah wandered into the kitchen, finding the fridge stocked with fresh produce. When Malachi returned, he found her lining up vegetables on the marble island. "You have a housekeeper here too?" she asked. "One for the whole family row. My parents and sister have places nearby." Keturah nodded, looking at the raw chicken. "So, are you going to help, or do you not cook?" Malachi leaned against the counter, his arms crossed over his chest. "Of course I don't." "Of course not," she teased. "Do you like it spicy?" His mouth twitched into a smirk. He stepped closer, his presence suddenly overwhelming the small kitchen space. He placed his hands on her hips, drawing her back against him. "I can handle the heat, Keturah. Don't worry about me." Dinner was a quiet affair, followed by the slow process of putting the children to sleep. With the kids finally tucked away in the room next door, a heavy silence settled over the beach house. "Can we go out to the swing?" Keturah asked, gesturing toward the porch. "It's freezing out there." "You can keep me warm," she whispered, tugging on his hand. "Please." Malachi gave in with a sigh. He grabbed a stack of thick wool blankets while Keturah threw on their coats. They huddled together on the wooden swing, the rhythmic creak of the chains blending with the roar of the waves. He wrapped the blankets around them both, pulling her tight against his side. "You aren't what I expected," Malachi said into the darkness. "Oh, what did you expect?" "I thought this marriage would be a cold arrangement. I thought I'd have to force the physical side of things." Keturah leaned her head on his shoulder. "I like being with you, Malachi. You make me feel safe. Most of the time." He chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Good. Did you ever—" "No talk about the past," he interrupted, his voice turning firm but not unkind. "Let's just watch the water." Keturah fell silent. She looked out at the dark, churning sea, feeling the warmth of the man beside her. For the first time since the wedding, the shadows of his first wife and his dangerous life felt a little further away. She didn't know what the future held, but for tonight, the sound of the waves was enough. "The sandcastle's tomorrow," Keturah whispered. "Do you think he'll really play?" "We'll find out," Malachi replied. "But for now, just stay right here. Barnaby, Jedediah, come here." Keturah called out, her voice competing with the roar of the Atlantic. The dog and the boy turned in unison, racing across the damp sand toward them. Malachi watched them, his fingers still entwined with Keturah's. For a fleeting second, the shadows lifted from Jedediah's face. He looked like a normal child, innocent and light, before the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. The moment of peace ended with a sharp buzz in Malachi's pocket. He pulled out his phone. The screen displayed a single message from Obadiah: "Call me ASAP." Malachi felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, his jaw setting. "What is it?" Keturah asked, her grip on his hand tightening. "We need to head back to the house," Malachi said. "I need to call Obadiah." Keturah's smile vanished. "Oh, sure." Malachi squeezed her hand, trying to offer a reassurance he didn't feel. "We can come back tomorrow morning." The drive back to the beach house was short and tense. Once inside, Keturah began cleaning the sand off the dog and Jedediah. Zilphia crawled across the hardwood floor, her rattleball clacking loudly. Malachi stepped into the office and dialed Obadiah. "What is it?" "I told you I didn't want to be disturbed," Malachi snapped as soon as the line connected. "While you were away, Thaddeus went on a rampage," Obadiah replied, his voice low and urgent. "He killed Uncles Lazarus and Mordecai. He even took out that cousin, the one whose brother he dealt with before. Malachi leaned against the desk, the air leaving his lungs. What happened? Nobody is talking. Enoch is keeping a tight lid on it. There are rumors Thaddeus wiped out an entire motorcycle club chapter in Jersey, too. He's hunting traitors. Word is, his wife went to Chicago and met with Benjamin Hostetler. Malachi looked down. Zilphia had crawled to his feet, using his pant leg to pull herself up. She looked up at him with a wide, toothless grin. He reached down to steady her small frame, his mind racing. If Thaddeus was cleaning house, no one was safe. Is Celeste still alive? Malachi asked. She is. For now. I'll be back tonight, Malachi said, his voice turning cold and professional. Arrange a meeting. My father needs to be there. If Thaddeus is on a spree, I need to make sure Philadelphia is spotless. He hung up just as Keturah entered the room. Her eyes searched his. What's wrong? Nothing for you to worry about, he said. Your face says something else, Malachi. He sighed, knowing he couldn't hide the scale of this. It's business. Thaddeus killed 2 underbosses. Your uncles, Lazarus and Mordecai. Keturah flinched. She didn't cry. Her uncles hadn't been men worth crying for, but the shock paled her cheeks. Are you in danger? What if Thaddeus doesn't stop with him? He won't touch me, Malachi said firmly. Not unless I give him a reason. And I haven't. Keturah's eyes suddenly widened. Talitha! She's Mordecai's daughter. She's only 12. Malachi, please. Find out if she's okay. Malachi didn't hesitate. He dialed his father immediately. Obadiah told you? His father asked. I know about the uncles. I need to know about the girl and the wife. The kid is alive, his father said. But Mordecai shot his own wife before he went down. Malachi, you should have told Thaddeus everything years ago. The past is going to catch up. The past stays in the past, Malachi hissed. Telling him now is a death sentence. I'm coming home. He ended the call and looked at Keturah. Talitha is alive. Her mother is dead. We leave in 30 minutes. Pack the bags. The drive home was a blur of gray highway and silence. By the time they reached the main house, Malachi's soldiers, Enoch and Silas, were waiting to take the luggage. Malachi went straight to the bedroom to change into a dark suit. Where is the meeting? Keturah asked, watching him tighten his silk tie. A club downtown. Don't wait up for me. It's going to be a long night. He kissed her briefly, the scent of her perfume a sharp contrast to the cold violence waiting for him outside. Hours later, Keturah sat on the sofa, Barnaby curled at her feet. She watched Jedediah play with Zilphia, but her mind was with her cousin Talitha. She picked up her phone and dialed her father. Keturah, tonight isn't a good time, her father said. Is Talitha okay? I heard you might take her in. Your mother and I have worked hard for our reputation, her father grumbled. Taking in the daughter of a traitor is a risk. She's 12, Dad. She's family. Don't be cruel. There was a long pause. Thaddeus might not give us a choice. How are things with Malachi? Good. Better than good. Really? Her father sounded genuinely surprised. Well, your mother wants to speak with you. Her mother's voice came on the line, sharp and high-pitched. Keturah, you need to think about your future. You need to provide Malachi with an heir. A son of your own will secure your place. Jedediah is my son, Keturah said, her voice hardening. And I'm not having a baby for tactical reasons. I have to go. Zilphia needs me. She hung up and stared at the fire. She waited for hours, the house growing cold as the embers died. She eventually fell into a light, restless sleep in the armchair. A sudden touch on her arm made her bolt upright. The room was dark, but the smell hit her first: iron, smoke, and expensive scotch. Malachi stood over her. "I told you not to wait up," he whispered. His voice sounded frayed. "What time is it?" Keturah reached out, her hand landing on his forearm. The fabric of his white dress shirt felt stiff, crusty. "Malachi?" He pulled away instantly. "Go to bed, Keturah. Now!" She stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You're bleeding. What happened?" "Go to bed." "No. I'm your wife. I'm not going anywhere until I know you're okay." Malachi let out a jagged breath. "Your insolence is going to be the end of me." "I think you like it," she countered, following him into the bedroom. She flipped the light switch. The bright overhead glow revealed the truth. The sleeve of his white shirt was soaked in dark, drying blood. He walked into the bathroom and began unbuttoning the shirt with one hand. The fabric was stuck to a long, jagged gash on his forearm. Keturah stepped in, grabbing a clean towel and soaking it in warm water. She gently pressed the damp cloth to the wound, loosening the fibers of the shirt. "Not your first time doing this?" Malachi asked, his eyes tracking her movements with a strange intensity. "I'm trying not to have a panic attack," she admitted, her voice trembling. "What if something happened to you? What would I do with the kids and the dog? It's a shallow cut. I'll survive." He cleaned the wound and applied butterfly bandages. Keturah didn't look away. "Thaddeus had me look into a motorcycle club," Malachi explained. "They'd been moving into our territory. One of them got lucky with a knife. That's all. Why didn't you send your men? My father would never risk himself like that." Malachi gave her a grim, ironic smile. "That's why your father is a weak leader. If you want loyalty, you bleed with your men. That's how you get killed," she whispered. She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around his waist and pressing her face to his bare chest. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I'm always careful. The blood on the floor says otherwise." A sharp cry echoed through the baby monitor on the nightstand. Zilphia was awake. "I'll go," Keturah said, starting to move. Malachi caught her arm, his touch gentler now. "No. Go to sleep. I'll handle the baby. You're hurt. I need to hold her, Keturah. Let me do this." She saw the look in his eyes, a need to touch something pure after a night of filth. She nodded and sank into the bed, exhaustion finally winning. As Malachi walked toward the nursery, Keturah realized the terrifying truth. She had grown up around cowards who stayed safe. Now, she was in love with a man who was brave enough to die. "Don't let her stay up too long," Keturah called out softly. "I won't," Malachi replied from the hallway. Keturah settled onto the rug, the plush fibers a small comfort against the cold marble floor. This was bonding time, a fragile peace she tried to cultivate while Zilphia took her afternoon nap. For the last few evenings, Malachi had returned home late, his presence a ghost in the hallways. She hoped it would not become a permanent habit. For now, she focused on Jedediah and Barnaby. They were distraction enough. Barnaby trotted closer, a small rubber ball clamped in her muzzle. Keturah took the toy and rolled it across the floor. Jedediah's dark eyes followed every movement with silent intensity. After a few tosses, Keturah held the ball out to the boy. Jedediah took it and flung it with a sudden burst of energy, a wide smile breaking across his face as the dog scrambled after it. They played like this for several minutes before Keturah patted the spot directly in front of her. Barnaby approached, her pink tongue lolling as she curled into Keturah's lap. Keturah stroked the dog's silky ears, amazed at how soft she felt. Jedediah shuffled closer until his knees bumped Keturah's thigh. He stared at Barnaby with a longing that tugged at Keturah's heart. Over the last few days, the dog had stopped avoiding the boy, seemingly sensing his gentleness. "Do you want to touch her?" Keturah asked softly. Jedediah gave a quick, sharp nod. "Move slowly," Keturah coached. "She is shy. She needs to know you are her friend." Keturah took Jedediah's small hand in hers and guided it toward Barnaby's back. The dog's ears twitched, but she remained still, her eyes drooping as she leaned into the affection. Keturah moved his hand along the dog's side, careful to avoid her head. "See? You must be very gentle," Keturah whispered. "She is small. No tugging at her ears or tail." Jedediah nodded again, mesmerized by the feeling of the fur beneath his palms. Keturah pulled her hand away, letting him continue on his own. It felt like a breakthrough. Even Malachi had stopped complaining about the dog, and Zilphia was finally letting Keturah soothe her at night, allowing Malachi a bit more rest. The optimism carried Keturah through the evening, but it withered the moment Malachi finally stepped into their bedroom late that night. It had been a week since the violence in the city began, and the family had barely seen him. Keturah watched him strip off his jacket, the tension in his shoulders visible even from across the room. He stretched out beside her on the bed, his weight shifting the mattress. "When will you be home for dinner again?" she asked. Malachi reached out, his hand resting on her hip to pull her closer. His lips moved toward hers, but despite the familiar rush of heat, Keturah pulled back. "Work is important," Malachi muttered, his voice thick with exhaustion. "I have too much to do. I am tired, Keturah. I only want to take my mind off things when I am home, not argue." He tried to kiss her again, but this time Keturah pushed against his chest, her temper finally snapping. "You treat me like a naughty and a convenience, Malachi," she snapped. "I deserve better than that." Malachi's jaw tightened, a low growl vibrating in his chest. "I would never treat you with anything but respect. You are my wife. I want you. If I remember correctly, you always enjoy it. That does not mean I do not need an emotional bond," Keturah countered. "I thought we were on a good path, but you are pulling back. Is it the workload, or is it something else?" Malachi remained silent for a long beat. "I am trying to keep you and the children safe. I must have absolute control of this city to guarantee that safety." He leaned in, his voice softening. "I will try to be home for dinner tomorrow." Keturah allowed the kiss then, letting him pull her nightgown down, but the underlying worry remained. The following afternoon, Keturah was browsing birthday ideas for Jedediah's upcoming 3rd birthday when her phone buzzed. It was a message from her brother, Abram. He was in the area and wanted to visit. Surprise and a hint of relief washed over her. She hadn't seen him since the wedding. When Abram's car pulled up 15 minutes later, Keturah gathered Zilphia in her arms. "Your uncle is here," she told Jedediah. Jedediah's reaction was strange. His eyes went wide, a flash of something like hope crossing his face. Keturah frowned. Did he remember a different uncle? The doorbell rang, and Barnaby erupted into a frenzy of barking. Keturah hurried to the door, nudging the dog back with her foot. Abram stood on the porch, wrapped in a heavy coat against the December chill. He looked at the dog and then at Keturah. "Of course you kept the dog," he remarked. Jedediah stared at Abram for a long second before turning on his heel and bolting upstairs. "What is with the kid?" Abram asked, stepping inside. "I don't know," Keturah admitted, leading him into the living room where she had set out sandwiches and coffee. As they sat, Barnaby paced the perimeter of the room, her eyes locked on Abram. "I am fine, really," Keturah said, responding to the unasked question in her brother's eyes. "Just overwhelmed. Jedediah won't talk, and he barely eats. I am trying to find out what happened to him, but I don't know how." Abram took a sip of his coffee. "The boy lost his mother. He is traumatized. It is more than that. He avoids Malachi, Keturah whispered. Abram's expression shifted, becoming guarded. Maybe you should let the past rest, Keturah. Malachi does not want people digging into his history, especially where Hadassah is concerned. To protect him or me? Both, Abram said firmly. And the kids. Jedediah will be underboss one day. This won't be the last trauma he faces. The coldness of the statement made Keturah's stomach turn. You think Malachi will hurt me if I keep looking? Men like Malachi have a dark side, Abram warned, leaning forward. To hold power in this life, you need that darkness. Sometimes it comes out when it shouldn't. The conversation was interrupted by Enoch, the bodyguard, appearing in the doorway. He looked between the siblings with clear suspicion. Everything all right? Enoch asked. Fine, Keturah said sharply. You can go home early, Enoch. Abram will stay with me. Enoch hesitated. Malachi ordered me to stay. Leave, Keturah commanded. Once the door clicked shut, Abram shook his head. He keeps you on a short leash. They shifted the topic to family, but the tension remained. When Zilphia needed a diaper change, Abram followed Keturah upstairs, though he looked visibly disgusted by the task. As Keturah cleaned the baby, she noticed the door to Hadassah's old room was slightly ajar. She made a mental note to check on Jedediah. Suddenly, Zilphia began to wail, a shrill, unhappy sound that ended with the baby spitting up all over Keturah's shirt and hair. You? Abram muttered. Keturah sighed, quickly changing the baby and putting her in the crib. I need to shower. Can you watch her for a moment? Sure, Abram said, leaning against the hallway wall. Keturah ducked into the master bathroom, stripping out of the ruined clothes. She threw on a bathrobe and ran the laundry down to the machine before jumping into the shower. The hot water was just beginning to wash away the stress when she heard a muffled roar from the bedroom. What the are you doing here? It was Malachi's voice, distorted by rage. Keturah scrambled out of the shower, wrapping herself in a towel. She burst into the bedroom, her hair dripping, and stopped dead. Malachi had Abram pinned against the wall, his forearm crushed against her brother's throat. Malachi's eyes snapped to Keturah. He took in her damp hair and the towel, and his face transformed into a mask of pure, murderous fury. He threw Abram to the floor, pulling a knife from his belt in one fluid motion. He dropped his weight onto Abram's chest, pressing the blade against the side of his neck. A thin line of blood appeared instantly. Malachi, stop! Keturah screamed, rushing forward to grab his arm. That is my brother! Let him go! Malachi ignored her, his face inches from Abram's. What were you doing alone with my wife? Have you lost your mind? Keturah sobbed, pulling at his shoulder. He is my brother. Nothing is happening. A small noise came from the doorway. Jedediah stood there, his face pale and sleepy. Malachi froze. In an instant, the rage was tucked away behind a terrifyingly calm mask. He stood up, hiding the knife behind his back. Go back to your room, Jedediah, Malachi said, his voice level. I will be there soon. The boy turned and fled. The moment the door clicked, the tension returned tenfold. Abram scrambled to his feet, hand pressed to his bleeding neck. Keturah stepped between them. I will ask one last time, Malachi hissed. Why are you here? Is this why Gideon disappeared? Abram spat back, his hand going to his own blade. The two men lunged at each other. Keturah tried to shove them apart, but a sharp, burning pain flared in her arm. She cried out, stumbling back. Malachi froze, staring at the long, shallow cut on Keturah's forearm. Blood began to drip onto the carpet. Did you? Malachi started, glaring at Abram. It was you, Malachi. Keturah lied, her voice trembling. You did this. The sight of her blood seemed to snap the final thread of Malachi's rage. He stepped back, his chest heaving. Abram backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving Malachi. "Leave!" Keturah shouted at her brother. "I will call you in 30 minutes," Abram said, slipping out of the room. The bedroom was silent, save for the sound of Malachi's heavy breathing. He sheathed his knife, the guilt finally visible in his eyes. He approached her slowly. "I am not going to hurt you." He took her arm, inspecting the wound with a frown. "Did I do this?" "It does not matter," Keturah whispered. "You lost control." He led her to the bathroom, cleaning and wrapping the cut in silence. When he finished, he looked up, his eyes hard again. "Why did you shower before I came home?" Keturah stared at him, stunned. "Are you serious? Zilphia threw up on me. Check the laundry if you don't believe me." Malachi actually left the room to check. When he returned, the fire in him had died down to embers. "I cannot believe you thought I would cheat on you with my brother," Keturah said, her voice hollow. "You should trust me, Malachi." "Why do you think I don't trust you?" Malachi asked, his voice rough. "You block me out. You hide behind a mask. And then you almost kill my brother in a jealous rage. Tell me the truth about Hadassah." Malachi's jaw locked. He turned and walked toward Jedediah's room without a word. Later that night, after the children were asleep, they sat by the fire in the living room. Malachi held a glass of bourbon, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "Tell me the truth," Keturah begged. "If you want this marriage to work, tell me." Malachi looked at her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I needed that last look before you see me for what I am," he whispered. He took a long sip of his drink. "I killed my first wife." The world seemed to stop spinning. Keturah pulled her hand away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Not with my hands," Malachi corrected, his voice a low, bitter rasp. "She took her own life. But she did it because of me." "Why?" Keturah breathed. Malachi looked into the fire, a dark smile touching his lips. "Because I killed the man she loved. Uncle Gideon gave me this to play," Jedediah said, his small thumb swiping across the bright tablet screen. Malachi looked down at his son, or the boy he called his son, and felt the first cold drop of a coming storm. The house was too quiet for midnight. The air felt thick, like the moments before a basement execution. He looked at the stairs. "Where is he, Jedediah?" "Upstairs with Mom. They're playing." Malachi didn't wait. He drew his weapon, the cold steel a familiar weight that usually brought him peace. Not tonight. He climbed the stairs with the silence of a predator, his heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. Outside the nursery door, a sound broke the silence, a sharp gasp, a low grunt. It wasn't the sound of pain. It was the sound of a secret. He kicked the door. It hit the wall with a crack like a gunshot. The world stopped. Hadassah, his wife, was not alone. She was with Gideon. The sight was a jagged blade twisting in Malachi's gut. They scrambled, a blur of skin and panicked eyes. For a heartbeat, nobody spoke. Then Hadassah screamed, a high, thin sound that tore through the room. Gideon didn't beg. He lunged for the nightstand, reaching for a gun. Malachi was faster. He pulled the trigger. The bullet found Gideon's hand, turning bone and skin into a red mist. Gideon howled, collapsing back. "No!" Hadassah shrieked. She scrambled toward the weapon, her movements heavy with the weight of the child she carried. Malachi grabbed her, his arm a vice around her waist. He slammed his hand over her mouth to stifle the noise. "Stop!" he hissed into her ear. "Jedediah is downstairs. Do not let him hear this." He dragged her to the bathroom, shoved her inside, and turned the lock. The pounding of her fists against the wood was a dull, rhythmic thud. He turned back to Gideon. The man was a mess of blood and pride. He tried for the gun with his other hand. Malachi shot that one, too. "Don't hurt him!" Hadassah's voice muffled through the door, desperate and raw. "Don't, Malachi, or I'll kill the baby!" Malachi froze. The blood in his veins turned to ice. He walked to the door, his voice a low growl. "You would hurt your daughter for him." "I've loved him my whole life," she cried back. "He's all that matters. It's him or you, Malachi. And I want you dead." The honesty of it was worse than the cheating. He didn't answer. He worked in grim silence, binding Gideon to the radiator and taping his mouth shut. He did the same to Hadassah, ensuring she couldn't fulfill her dark promise to hurt the unborn child. Downstairs, Jedediah was still in the living room. The boy looked up, his eyes wide. "I heard screaming, Daddy." Malachi forced a smile. It felt like a mask made of lead. "They're just playing a game, buddy." Mom got a little startled. "Let's get you to bed." He carried the boy up, tucked him in, and locked the door from the outside. The protection felt hollow. He went back to the basement, dragging a bleeding Gideon down the stone steps. Obadiah was already there, waiting in the shadows of the soundproof room. "Is he the rat?" Obadiah asked, his voice steady. "Worse," Malachi said. He ripped the tape from Gideon's mouth. "How long?" Gideon spat blood. He smiled, a gruesome, triumphant thing. "Since she was 15. She's always been mine." He leaned forward, his voice a wheeze. "Jedediah? The baby? They aren't yours, Malachi. They're mine." The world turned white. Malachi didn't use his gun. He used his hands. He struck until his knuckles split, until the sound of impact changed from a thud to a crunch. He didn't stop until Obadiah pulled him away, and even then, he wanted to tear the world apart. Gideon was gone, a bloody heap on the floor. "He said it to hurt you," Obadiah whispered, looking at the body. "You don't know if it's true." "I know what I see," Malachi rasped. The months that followed were a slow-motion car crash. Zilphia was born in a room filled with guards and tension. Hadassah grew distant, her mind breaking under the weight of her lost lover. She spent her days with a dog, a small creature named Barnaby, giving it the love she refused her children. Malachi watched from the shadows of his own home, a ghost in a suit. Then came the anniversary. 8 years of a lie. Malachi walked into the house and felt the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. He found the nanny, Dorcas, slumped on the sofa, drugged into a deep sleep. "Dorcas! Wake up!" He shook her, but her eyes were glassy. He took the stairs 3 at a time. On the landing, he saw them. Tiny red paw prints. They led straight to the bedroom. He burst into the nursery. Zilphia was still. His heart stopped beating. He snatched her up, and she let out a piercing wail. He slumped against the crib, shaking. She was alive. In the hallway, Jedediah stood holding the dog. The animal's fur was matted with wet, dark red. The boy's arms were stained. "Mom's asleep," Jedediah whispered. "Go downstairs, son," Malachi said, his voice cracking. "Go to Dorcas." He walked into Hadassah's room. The scent of iron was overwhelming. She lay on the bed in her white wedding dress, her wrists slit, the fabric soaked crimson. She looked like a tragic painting. Barnaby sat on the floor, licking at the pool of blood with mindless devotion. Malachi picked up a letter from the nightstand. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a curse. She blamed him. She blamed the world. She claimed her victory in death. Obadiah and his father arrived within the hour. The cleanup crew moved like shadows, erasing the evidence of the tragedy. "Don't feel guilty," his father said, leaning on his cane. She was a traitor. She chose this. I didn't choose any of it, Malachi replied. He didn't stay for the funeral arrangements. He didn't stay to watch the blood be scrubbed from the floorboards. He took his car and drove to his in-laws' house. When the door opened, he didn't offer condolences. He offered a reckoning. "We need to talk about your children," Malachi said, raising his piece. The next morning, the papers called it a double suicide. A family destroyed by grief. Malachi sat in his dark office, looking at a photo of Jedediah. He didn't care about the bloodline anymore. He didn't care about the truth. "You're my son," he whispered to the empty room. "And that is the only law that matters. I never imagined the truth would be the thing to finally break us," Malachi said, his voice like grinding stone. He stood by the fireplace, the orange glow casting long, jagged shadows across the room. He didn't look at his wife. He couldn't. Keturah sat on the edge of the sofa, her face drained of color. Her lips were parted, trembling slightly as the weight of his confession settled between them. "When I married Hadassah," Malachi continued, his gaze fixed on the dying embers, "she was already in love with her half-brother. I was blind to it. Her parents knew the truth, but they sold her to me anyway. Maybe now you understand why I couldn't trust Abram. Why I can't trust anyone." Keturah covered her mouth with her palm, her eyes dropping to the floor. The silence in the room felt heavy, suffocating. Even the air seemed to have thickened with the history of blood and betrayal he had just laid bare. "Oh my God," she whispered. Malachi grimaced. He hated the memory, but seeing the horror on Keturah's face was a fresh kind of torture. "After the wedding, she asked for her half-brother to be her bodyguard. I agreed. I thought she was just homesick. I wanted her to be happy." He let out a harsh, cynical laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "I killed her parents for that lie. Their betrayal cost Hadassah and Gideon their lives." Keturah sucked in a sharp breath. She was a creature of light, a woman who looked for the best in people even when they didn't deserve it. Malachi felt a pang of genuine regret. He had dragged Hadassah into his abyss, and now he feared he was doing the same to the woman currently trembling in front of him. "I never raised a hand against Hadassah," Malachi said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent rumble. "Not even at the end. Whatever you decide to do now, Keturah, you don't have to fear me. I won't hurt you." Keturah felt like the walls were closing in. The raw bitterness in Malachi's voice was unlike anything she had ever heard. To find a wife with another man was a nightmare, but to find out the children might not even be his. It was a level of betrayal she couldn't fathom. She looked at the man standing by the fire, a man raised in a world where violence was the only currency. Malachi turned to her, a grim, hopeless smile on his face. "That is the man you married. I'll understand if you want to move to a different wing of the house. But for Zilphia and Jedediah, we have to stay married. They can't lose another mother." Keturah didn't move away. Instead, she stood up and walked toward him. She climbed into his lap, ignoring the way his body went rigid with surprise. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him with a desperate, fierce intensity. Malachi pulled back just an inch, his eyes wide with confusion. "What are you doing? I'm not scared of you," Keturah said, her face pressed against the pulse point in his neck. She felt his heart racing. "I've always known you were capable of being brutal. But you killed because you were hurt, not because you're a monster. You kept Hadassah alive when most men in your position would have ended her. You protected those children. Your impression of me was already low then," Malachi muttered, though he didn't pull away. Keturah rolled her eyes, trying to break the tension. She cupped his cheek, forcing him to look at her. "Stop thinking I'm Hadassah. I'm not her. I'm loyal, and I want this. Can you get that through your thick skull?" Malachi pointed to his chest. In here, I know you aren't her. But up here? He tapped his temple. I'm not a trusting man. I never have been. But I'm trying, Keturah. I can't lose you. You won't, she promised. I'm ready to fight for us. For our children. Malachi froze. What did you say? Keturah felt her face heat up. She hadn't meant to let the word slip, but it was the truth. I know they aren't mine biologically, but I care for them. It hurts when you talk like I'm just a guest in their lives. Malachi didn't say another word. He surged forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of relief and hunger. When he finally broke away, he whispered, I don't deserve you, but our kids do. The next morning, the house felt different, quieter yet more settled. Keturah found Jedediah in his mother's old bedroom, curled up on the rug. The sight sent a chill down her spine, remembering Malachi's description of finding Hadassah there. She picked the boy up gently, carrying him out of the room as if escaping a ghost. Later that afternoon at the park, the breakthrough happened. Keturah was helping Zilphia take shaky, uncertain steps on the grass while Jedediah sat nearby with Barnaby. The dog was busy digging a hole in the dirt, and Jedediah was focused intently on her. Barnaby, a tiny voice whispered. Keturah nearly tripped over her own feet. She looked over to see Jedediah staring at the dog. He hadn't spoken to her, but he had spoken. It was a start. She didn't push him, didn't make a scene. She simply watched as he patted the dog's head with a small, muddy hand. When Malachi came home that night, he looked spent. The weight of the world seemed to be resting on his shoulders. Jedediah spoke today, Keturah said, as they sat in the cigar lounge later that evening. Malachi stopped mid-motion, a billiard cue in his hand. To you? To the dog, Keturah clarified. But he said good night to me when I tucked him in. Malachi leaned against the pool table, a mix of pride and a deep, aching jealousy crossing his features. He speaks to a dog and my wife, but not his father. He's healing, Malachi. He needs time. Maybe we should take him to the beach house for his birthday? Get him away from this house and the memories. Malachi nodded slowly. The beach house. He likes the water. We can do that. He reached out, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. Is there anything about you I don't love? Keturah smiled, leaning into his touch. Even my short skirts? Malachi's eyes darkened, the tension from the day shifting into something entirely different. He gripped her waist and hoisted her onto the edge of the pool table. The green felt was cool against her skin, but Malachi was pure heat. Especially the skirts, he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. He didn't rush. He never did. He moved between her legs, his touch deliberate and demanding. Keturah arched her back, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. The world outside the room, the blood, the betrayal, the secrets, faded away until there was nothing left but the rhythm of their breathing and the clack of the billiard balls as they moved against the table. Afterward, as they lay tangled together on the felt, the shadows returned, but they were softer now. I wonder what I'll tell him, Malachi said quietly, staring up at the ceiling. When he asks why his family is gone. Keturah turned on her side, propping herself up on his chest. We tell him the truth, but a version he can carry. We tell him there was a betrayal, and it broke his mother's heart. We protect him, Malachi. That's what parents do. Malachi sighed, his chest rising and falling beneath her. I never thought I'd find someone who would lie to protect me. I'm not protecting a lie, Keturah whispered. I'm protecting our family. Then stay with me, Malachi said, his grip tightening around her. Don't let the shadows win. Is everything all right? Keziah's voice crackled through the phone, her curiosity sharp enough to cut through the static. Keturah adjusted the receiver, her gaze drifting toward the window of their home. Yes, of course. We're heading to the beach house for Jedediah's birthday this weekend. I wanted to see if you and the family would join us. Unless it's too much of a trek? There was a pregnant pause. Keziah was only 3 weeks out from her due date, and travel was a gamble. He's taking you there already? Keturah's brow furrowed at the surprise in her sister-in-law's tone. We've actually spent a weekend there before. Why? Oh, that's wonderful, Keturah. Keziah sounded genuinely stunned, as if a door had been opened that was supposed to remain locked. We'll be there. Should I ask Priscilla and the parents to come along? Please, Keturah breathed, a weight lifting from her chest. Navigating Malachi's parents alone was a task she wasn't ready for. By Friday afternoon, the air at the coast was biting, but the sun turned the waves into shattered glass. Malachi moved through the beach house with a new kind of purpose. He had bought the presents himself, a task usually delegated to assistants or ignored entirely. In the kitchen, Keturah began lining up bowls and bags of flour. Malachi stepped up behind her, his presence a wall of heat. He wore a heavy sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, and the scent of his spicy aftershave made Keturah's breath hitch. He didn't say a word at first, his hand sliding along her side to rest briefly on her hip. It was a firm, grounding squeeze before he moved away. What's all this? He asked, gesturing to the mess of sprinkles and dye. A funfetti rainbow cake, Keturah said, a playful smile tugging at her lips. Malachi blinked, looking genuinely lost. A what? You'll see. She nodded toward the terrace door where Jedediah stood with his nose pressed to the glass, watching the gulls. Barnaby, the small, fluffy terror of the household, sat at his heels. Why don't you take him for a walk? I want the cake to be a surprise. Malachi's dark eyebrows shot up. I can try. At that moment, little Zilphia crawled across the tile, using Keturah's leg as a ladder to pull herself up. She didn't cry for her father anymore. She stayed glued to Keturah. I didn't think they'd take to you this fast, Malachi remarked, his voice dropping an octave. They're young, Keturah replied softly. They just want to be loved. Yeah. Malachi looked at his son's lonely silhouette against the window. Take the dog too, Keturah suggested. Jedediah loves her. If he sees her trust you, he might follow suit. It's how I got through to him. Malachi shook his head, a rare look of reluctance crossing his face. That dog hates me. It's a miracle she hasn't taken a finger off yet. Keturah picked up Zilphia and stepped closer to him. Start by calling her Barnaby. Just try. For me? Malachi groaned, but the hardness in his eyes melted. He leaned down, catching Keturah's lips in a brief, firm kiss that tasted of salt and coffee. Zilphia reached out, grabbing for his chin with chubby fingers. Malachi didn't pull away. He playfully nipped at her hand, making the baby shriek with laughter. He straightened up, sighing as he looked at the leash Keturah held out. She's going to bolt the second we hit the sand. That's what the leash is for, big guy, Keturah teased. Watching Malachi, a man who commanded soldiers and moved through the underworld with ice in his veins, struggle to clip a leash onto a 10-pound dog was a sight. He picked up Jedediah, who remained a silent, stiff weight in his arms. 5 minutes later, the trio was on the sand. From the kitchen window, Keturah watched the massive frame of her husband trudging through the dunes, flanked by a tiny boy in a snowsuit and a fluffball dog that kept trying to trip him. It was a mess, but it was a start. Keturah turned back to the dough. She wasn't a baker, but she was an artist. She split the batter into bowls, swirling in vibrant blues, pinks, and yellows. By the time the sun began to dip, a multicolored masterpiece was cooling in the fridge, hidden under a thick layer of buttercream and a mountain of sprinkles. An hour later, the house filled with a chaos of family. Keziah arrived, looking like she was carrying a bowling ball under her shirt. Her husband, Barnabas, offered a stiff handshake before heading straight for the liquor cabinet with Malachi.